Welcome to First Mile's Climate Heroes. I'm your host, Bruce Bratley, founder of recycling company First Mile. On this show, we meet and learn from the climate heroes who are building solutions right now to tackle climate change. Keep Britain Tidy is an environmental charity working at the heart of business, government and the community to empower us all to take action to improve our environment. Keep Britain Tidy has its work cut out. They campaign for us to reduce our consumption, create a litter-free society and work to eliminate fly tipping. No mean feat when we're dropping 2 million pieces of litter every day and consume more and more each year. And to explain their brilliant work, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Anna Scott to First Mile's Climate Heroes. Anna is responsible for overseeing the development and delivery of high-quality research, innovation and evidence-based services at Keep Britain Tidy. Anna, welcome to First Mile's Climate Heroes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anna, I want to start with your most recent campaign called Buy Nothing New Month. And this campaign is focused on wasting less rather than, as you say, wasting better. What is the campaign and why has Keep Britain Tidy launched it?
So Buy Nothing New Month is running in January this year. It's the first time we've run this campaign. And it's a month of celebrating, inspiring, helping people to buy nothing new. And, why should we do that? Why is that important? Well, the way we live in the UK, in developed countries, where we buy lots of stuff, we consume lots of natural resources, it has a very detrimental impact on the environment. From manufacturing, packaging, shipping, delivery, every stage of getting that product made and in our hands uses natural resources. It emits carbon dioxide, which is causing climate change. And added to that, at the end of it, when we throw that thing away, we have mountains of waste to deal with. So that collectively is having a huge impact on our environment. And we really need to change the way we live in the UK. So if everyone around the world lived like the average person in the UK, we'd need 2.6 planets to live on to give us all of the natural resources that we use and to absorb all that carbon dioxide we're producing. And that is inherently unsustainable. And the way in which we can reduce our impact is to simply to buy less stuff. So we know that recycling is a great thing to do. Giving away stuff we don't want anymore is a great thing to do, but we need to do more than that and we need to buy less. And that's what Buy Nothing New Month is all about.
And is there a reason you've done it in January? Is it because we're on the back of the mass consumerism at Christmas, or is that just coincidental?
We have a busy year of different types of campaigns at Keep Britain Tidy. So there's an element of what can we fit in when in our calendar, but January certainly does seem like a good time to try and encourage people to get into new habits. But also I think lots of people do recognise the excess of Christmas, the amount of things they're buying, the money they're spending, the stuff they have in their homes can be quite overwhelming. So it seems a really good opportunity to try and get people into new habits and that they can carry on for the year.
Okay, yeah, great. And I really like this distinction that you're making where the research that you undertook, the public think that wasting better, so for example, recycling something rather than throwing it in a lay-by or recycling rather than putting it in a litter bin, this idea that they think they're doing the right thing by wasting better, which is moving material up the hierarchy by recycling it or potentially reusing it. But what you're saying is actually we need to take that to the next level because we're not really thinking about minimizing waste. And the public, I think your research has shown that the public don't really have the toolkit to practice waste minimization. And is that sort of, I quite like that distinction between wasting better and wasting less.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Buy Nothing New campaign came off the back of a large piece of research that we've been doing at Keep Britain Tidy over the past 12 months, really. In that research, we really want to look at what people understood about waste prevention as opposed to recycling. So we're talking about the reduce and reuse part of the 3 Rs, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. So when we started that piece of work, we really felt that actually we have lots of experience of talking to people about waste and their impact on the environment. And people always default to recycling. It's always recycling is the solution. We need to be able to recycle more things and better facilities, etc. And that really got us thinking, and really thought we want to unpick that a bit more. We want to specifically focus on that issue and really explore that with a mind to, if people do default to recycling, how can we shift them up the waste hierarchy? How can we get them reducing and reusing as well as recycling? This isn't about recycling being a bad thing. It's very important that we do that we carry on. But there are better things that we can do to reduce our environmental impact. And actually, what we found through our research was really quite striking, in that the majority of people conceive waste as the thing they are throwing away in the bin that they are not recycling. So if they are recycling it, it's not perceived so much to be waste. And in that sense, people think of waste as something to be managed, i.e. through recycling, rather than prevented in the first place by not having the thing or reusing the thing that they already have.
This is very interesting, actually, because I first came across this a few years ago with a client when I went to see their sustainability team, and they said, yeah, we want to get zero waste in 2 years or 3 years or something. And it's a massive business. And I was like, how are you going to get to zero waste? Because you've got all this sort of food on the go and all these things happening. It would just require massive change. And they actually meant that, which was they wanted to have no waste in the waste bin, which was still a big challenge, which I found initially very confusing.
Yeah, so recycling is still waste. It's still a stream to be dealt with that requires energy and resources to go into it, and it's obviously far better than throwing it away to go to landfill being the worst thing, or to go to energy from waste, which is better than landfill. But it's still to be dealt with. It's still waste. You're still managing that waste. You're not preventing it. So the majority of people do think of recycling as being waste prevention, which it's strictly speaking, it's not. And so ultimately we found there's a very significant fundamental misunderstanding of the waste hierarchy, of that reduce, reuse, recycle. And we feel that while that remains, that is a huge barrier to shifting people up the waste hierarchy to waste prevention. Why would you buy less if you think that you're doing your bit by recycling? And that's not really been recognised before within the industry. So I think anyone who works in this sector should, be proud of the strides that we've taken in this country over the last 20 years around recycling. There's still lots to do. We need more recycling. We need better quality recycling. And more people recycling more things more of the time. Of course, we still need to do that. There's still work to do there. But we've moved on massively to where we were 20 years ago. But the consequence of essentially it all being about recycling is now that the public think it's all about recycling. So people, lots of people are very concerned about the levels of packaging that the item that they buy comes in. And rightly so, but far less concerned about that item itself. And that item itself has an environmental impact.
And this is the sort of the convenience of recycling for a consumer society, because it is effectively, waste legitimization is, anything, a convenient way of incinerating things, burying it in the ground and hiding it. Recycling it to regenerate it into new products, it fundamentally feeds the sort of consumer model, and some of it's linear, some of it's slightly circular, but as you say, that ultimately not buying things is minimizing waste, but it sort of runs against the consumer society we live in. So you've taken quite a big bite of the cherry there. Is it having an impact?
I think what you're touching on there is really important, because we live in a society within a system that is all geared up to us carrying on consuming as the basis of the economy, of jobs, And actually, recycling doesn't really challenge that status quo, which is why if you look back at waste policy over the last 20 years, it's all about recycling. And essentially we've reaped what we've sowed in terms of people think it's all about recycling because we've made it all about recycling. And waste prevention is a massive challenge when we live in that system that's all geared up to be about carrying on consuming. So that there is a real, that there is absolutely a tension there. But within the environmental sector, within the NGO space, there are very few people talking about reducing consumption. And we felt it was important to get into that space and talk about the message, because who else is saying it? But it's a very important message that needs to be communicated.
So with Buy Nothing New Month, are you targeting specific types or groups of material, types of product, or is it really taking us everywhere from a coffee cup through to a new television?
When we were doing the research, we did look broadly at all of the different waste streams that tend to be targeted around waste prevention messages. So we did look at food, plastics, electrical and electronics, clothing and furniture. But in terms of Buy Nothing New, we are tending to focus on the stuff in inverted commas that you buy. So clothing, electrical and electronic items, furniture, that kind of, your disposable income, what you're spending on. So that's really the focus. So we've touched less on kind of single-use plastics and things, because actually they're fairly well covered by other campaigns out there. But as I said, this is our first outing for Buy Nothing New Month, and we are committed to hopefully doing it again. And I'm sure the campaign will evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. And moving on from that then, so it's sort of interesting that Keep Britain Tidy are working, very much up the waste hierarchy, but your history is sort of steeped in, as the name rather brilliantly says, keeping Britain tidy. And I think you, probably fair to say, started life as a campaigning organisation to stop people dropping litter. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is our history. We were founded as a campaign by the Women's Institute, and over time have evolved. So currently we have 3 goals as an environmental charity. We do work to eradicate litter and reduce waste, but also work to improve the quality of local places and to help people live more sustainably. So we do have a very broad remit around the environment. And we are most famous for our work around litter. And I think that is the most visible example of how we live in a wasteful society. But, waste comes in many different forms. It is the packaging that gets a lot of people very worked up, and it is the stuff that we buy and that we don't need and we don't use. So, we are a campaigning organisation. We're passionate about saving the environment, and we need people to buy less and maximise the life of what they do have. And that's what will cut waste more than any single measure, hence why we're doing Buy Nothing New Month.
We've begun at the end, if you like, with Keep Britain Tidy, with Buy Nothing New Month, and that obviously brings us right up to date. What's the sort of contemporary work that you're doing on littering, and in its worst guise, littering, fly tipping, and what's new at Keep Britain Tidy in the world of littering and fly tipping, and sort of hopefully avoiding that?
We've been doing a lot of work over the past few years around fly tipping. We work very closely with local authorities across England, listening to what their local environmental priorities are and what their issues of concern. And fly tipping is consistently up there as being a huge problem, and a problem which is getting worse, particularly in urban local authorities. So we began programme of research around domestic fly tipping a number of years ago. And in February of last year, we compiled all of our research insights into that problem of fly tipping into a publication called Beyond the Tipping Point, which is available on our website. And it talks about what we've found about fly tipping, but also what that means for, particularly for how local authorities and other land managers can try to tackle that issue. So we do a lot of work to support local authorities to tackle that problem, but that is also a massive issue, which at the heart of it is about people having more and more stuff, and more stuff means more and more stuff to dispose of.
Littering, we see it everywhere we go. There's 2 million pieces dropped every single day in the UK. I think that's also Keep Britain Tidy's research. It's a huge problem. Smoking related litter is the first element, which tends to be smaller, but then the big part of that is on the go food packaging. Is littering a UK problem? I mean, we have a beautiful country. We're very proud of it, I think most of us. Or is littering all over the world? How can we stop littering?
I think, that's a very difficult question, but the whole reason why Keep Britain Tidy was set up all those years ago. So obviously litter, has been a problem for a number of years, and it continues to be. And again, it's a very challenging issue to which there's no magic solution. If there was, we'd have done it, and there'd be no need for Keep Britain Tidy. I think fundamentally, in modern times, there is again more and more stuff to get rid of. We live our lives on the go. We drink and we eat on the go. More and more fast food restaurants to eat at. It's how people spend their time. Out and about, eating, enjoying the outside, and enjoying food, etc. And all of that waste has to go somewhere. But there are of course many positive things we can do around littering to educate people, to nudge people in the right direction. But it is upsetting when you walk around parts of this country and you see the litter that's out there, and other countries appear to be cleaner and have more of a culture of not dropping litter in the first place.
With all three of these areas we're talking about in terms of fly tipping, littering, and consuming less products in the first place to minimise waste, there's a lot of emphasis on the individuals to do the right thing. And in his book, The New Climate War, climatologist Michael E. Mann argues there's too much emphasis placed on individuals to fix the planet, while big businesses continue to shirk responsibility and quite often spending huge amounts of money lobbying against change and top-down regulation. And he's not arguing against getting individuals to work to help the planet, because we all want to do our bit. But he argues that we need a combination of both personal action and systemic change to combat climate change. And I know that Keep Britain Tidy are also lobbying for change. And do you think you're getting the balance right between getting the government to change and get policies to change versus getting people to do the right thing?
I think you absolutely have to have the two. I think it's about individual action and systemic change. It has to be about those two things. I think where the balance lies does depend on how favourable, shall we say, the government of the day is to creating that systemic change. And for example, around actions which would reduce littering, deposit return scheme, things that would reduce waste prevention policy. What we see from the current government is continual delay. So we have to keep pushing for those changes and push for that systemic change. But while that is delayed and slow and not forthcoming, the other thing you've got is individual action. So we have to push on those two fronts.
And so you mentioned deposit return scheme there. One of my questions, will it help address littering? If you wouldn't mind for our listeners, if you explain what deposit return scheme is, and as in the recycling industry annoyingly call it another 3-letter acronym, DRS. What is how does the deposit thing work, and how does it sort of impact on packaging and potentially littering?
So deposit return scheme is where when you buy an item that could potentially be littered, so the best example would be a drinks container. You've bought a can, or you've bought a plastic bottle or a glass bottle. is that there will be a small additional charge levied on that thing that you're buying, but that you would get that charge back when you return the item. So there is suddenly an incentive for the consumer to return that item rather than litter it. So we've been pushing for implementation of deposit return scheme for some time, and we'll continue to do so, because all of the evidence from around the world shows that this is likely to massively bring down littering, because people, your drinks containers would be littered less often, perhaps up to degrees of around 90%, and that actually those kinds of heavily branded, instantly recognizable drinks containers, when they are littered, tend to act as what we call beacons of litter. Well, they're very visible and they tend to attract more litter along with it. So actually, if you can reduce that litter, you're likely to reduce litter across the board. So we do believe that a deposit return scheme would create an effective mechanism for changing behaviour. And we're particularly lobbying for an all-in deposit return scheme, which means we're talking about all kind of different sizes of drinks containers, and also including plastic, aluminium cans and glass as well. And the government's indicated they may not include glass in the scheme, which we believe would be a big mistake.
And would organisations such as Keep Britain Tidy get a proportion of that money to help campaign to promote keeping Britain tidy and anti-littering and using the deposit scheme properly, or is that sort of not on the cards for you? I mean, obviously, you'd love to get all of the money, but is that something that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think that would possibly be more of an element of extended producer responsibility, which is another policy that kind of sits alongside deposit return schemes. But that policy would represent a huge change in how waste management is organised and funded within the UK. But extended producer responsibility is the idea that the companies that produce the packaging would bear the cost of dealing with it. And in that sense, there should be an incentive there to move to materials which are more easily recyclable and have lower environmental impact. But again, the government has the signs around extended producer responsibility is that litter on the ground, the costs of clearing litter on the ground would not be included within extended producer responsibility, which at Keep Britain Tidy we believe it absolutely should be. And that an element of the funds that are collected through extended producer responsibility should be used to fund communications and education around anti-littering messages.
So if you could have, just on the sort of rounding up the policy element of things, if you could have a one-to-one with Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir, what key messages would you land on them to help us reduce our consumption to buy nothing new month?
I think to really try to convey to them the importance of looking at consumption. So we can take strides in this country to switch to cleaner energy, to move away from fossil fuels. But if we just outsource the stuff that we make to China and don't count those emissions in our carbon footprint, we've not achieved a whole lot. So we really need to look at the resources that we're using as a country, the emissions that we're responsible for as a country, which is not necessarily about the energy that we're just using here. It's about what we're buying from elsewhere, and look at that in the round, and particularly to have targets around reducing our resource consumption, targets to bring that down at absolute levels, not relative to how the economy is doing or relative to the number of people we've got, etc. Actual ways of bringing down the resources that we use. That is how we're going to reduce our impact on the environment and bring down our carbon emissions. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about consumption. We're talking about the way we live and the resources and the carbon associated with that. And the real need to look at that and make progress on that. Not to think that just, putting all your eggs in the basket of recycling is enough to get us out of the mess that we're in. We're not going to recycle our way out of the climate and nature emergency. And that really needs to be understood. And alongside that, there are very difficult issues, as I mentioned before, our society is all geared up around consuming. Let's consume more. Let's buy more stuff. You're bombarded with adverts all of the time on an increasing number of channels about, buying new stuff. So any message around buying nothing new is trying to shout against that very, very loud foghorn, pushing people to continually buy new things. And that's very difficult for one environmental charity like Keep Britain Tidy to fight against. It needs to be recognised more broadly by government, by policymakers, to create that systemic change that we talked about, where we do live good lives, that we're well fed and we have warm homes and we can get about and we can enjoy positive things about life. But it isn't just about buying, having more and more and more stuff.
First Mile is the UK's leading waste management service. We help over 30,000 businesses reduce their carbon impact with our award-winning range of recycling solutions. Go to our website, which is thefirstmile.co.uk, to get started today. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday.
Anna, it's such a fascinating subject. I mean, we've gone into it in huge depth, and thank you. How on earth did you become a climate hero? How did you get involved in Keep Britain Tidy? You've got 2 degrees, Chartered Institute of Waste Manager. How did you get piqued by this subject and get so involved in resource management?
When I was a child, watched Blue Peter, and there was a lot of coverage of environmental issues at that time. And I was just, interested in it, concerned about it, wanted to do what, wanted to know what I could do as a person, as a child. So, so it's an interest through childhood. And then I did a biology degree. So, and then there was an element of the environment in that. And then after that, I wanted to do a PhD. I wanted to study this field more. So that's what I did. And then, having done a PhD, decided I didn't want to work in academia. I wanted to do something more practical. So I joined a charity called Waste Watch, which was all about reduce, reuse, recycle. And then a few years later, that charity became part of Keep Britain Tidy, which is how we brought the waste agenda, waste and recycling agenda, came into Keep Britain Tidy. And then I've been there for 13 years. I'm sure when you talk to other people who work in waste, it's just fascinating. And there's always something new to learn about, something you didn't know. So it just continually keeps me interested. And everyone's got something to say about waste, because everyone has it and gets rid of it. And, so if you say you work in this sector, I'm sure you must get it all the time. Everyone's got their,
There's no shortage of it. We get everyone else's problems to figure out. Compostables we didn't touch on. So if we ban plastics, I've heard, let me rephrase it. I've heard people saying, well, let's move everything to compostables, because then littering isn't a problem. So if we chuck the material out the window, it'll just decompose and disappear into nature anyway. Presumably that it just isn't the case, because it's going to sit around for months, years anyway before it disappears. Is that causing a problem for the littering debate? Is compostables causing us a problem?
I think it just muddies the water. The compostable stuff is compostable under certain circumstances. And that circumstances is not necessarily composting in a bush, because that's where you've thrown your litter. And anyway, litter's still litter. Litter's something that shouldn't be there. So I still think that's an issue. And I think it's muddying the water, because on a wider scale, we'd be talking about needing to implement industrial composting to deal with the quantities of takeaway packaging, for example, that if it's swapped from plastic to compostable. So, you can buy compostable packaging, but when you put it in your bin, it's still going to landfill, or it's still going to energy from waste, depending on how your council deals with its waste. It's not going for composting. And for years I had a wormery, to deal with my food waste before I moved somewhere that has a food waste collection. And my husband put in a compostable plastic bottle. And I said, why have you put that in? Well, because it says it's compostable. I was like, it will not compost. Yes, it will, he said. I was like, okay, let's see, shall we? Let's see. And of course, it stayed exactly the same. The worm said no. And I said, I'm the chartered waste manager. I told you it wouldn't compost, but there you
Brilliant. Go. So compostables isn't the answer necessarily. And then the final quick question is this idea being kicked around quite a bit now. I'm sure you've heard of it, where some people, campaigners, are saying that it's now possible. Number plate recognition is so good. If you go through a drive-through restaurant, coffee, burgers, whatever, it's possible now, as the food on the go is handed over, to print on every single piece of packaging, or most of the piece of packaging, the number plate for the person who picked it up. And then if that ends up in the ditch 2 miles down the motorway, we can trace it back to the person who bought it. Is that something that's been taken forward? Is it actually a reality or bad idea?
I mean, I think the technology is there and is developing all of the time. So I think this will become more and more of an option on the table, but like any enforcement measure, it's part of the mix. We need robust, fair enforcement. We need more reusable systems so that, you haven't got that litter. It's not single use to be thrown away, it's to be reused. And we need behavioural change. We need people not to want to throw their litter, as well as being caught and fined if they do.
Yeah, and it could act as part of the deterrent. Anna, it's been brilliant having you on the show. Before you go, I've got two things. One is I'm going to get you to tell all the listeners how to find out about Buy Nothing New Month. So if you'd like to tell us where we can hear more about that, it'd be really helpful for everyone listening.
Yeah, if you go to keepbrittaintidy.org/Buy Nothing New Month, which has got some hyphens in, or just Google it. Keep Britain Tidy Buy Nothing New Month, and you'll find our page where you can sign up. And if you follow us on social media across January, lots of tips and tricks about what Buy Nothing New is, how to do it, why it's important, and to inspire you to get involved. And on social media, please use the hashtag Buy Nothing New Month, and tell us about what you're doing to buy nothing new.
Brilliant. Thank you. And we have our final regular feature, Climate Heroes Hall of Fame, where we ask our wonderful guests to put something, a person, a thought in our Hall of Fame. What or who would you put in the Climate Heroes Hall of Fame?
Well, I've got two. You can choose. As a thing, I would put the bicycle, but in particular, a bicycle plus a child seat or a trailer, or basically ways to get around on a cycle with your children. So I started cycling with my children 4 years ago, having not cycled in London and being quite fearful of it. And it's amazing for all sorts of reasons, which I'm sure your listeners will be very well aware of: health, well-being, no carbon, all of those wonderful things that come along with cycling with your children. But
cargo bike, love it.
Yes. Person, and you may think this is maybe being a bit political, but I'm going to put the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, in, on the basis that if he becomes the next Prime Minister, that what the Labour Party have said around their plans around energy policy are finally, in my view, starting to get somewhere near the scale and the urgency by which we need to move. So there's a lot of ifs around that, around him being the climate hero. But, if Labour Party is to become the next party of government, and if they enact what they've been talking about, and if they actually do it, they can achieve it, we'll have moved on
Well, we don't really feel like we've had an energy policy for about 30 years. So I think that would be a fantastic thing in there. So we welcome Sir Keir Starmer into our Climate Heroes Hall of Fame. Anna, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for your time. And really good luck with Buy Nothing New Month. Been fascinating hearing about that and everything you're doing at Keep Britain Tidy.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm Bruce Bratley, and you've been listening to First Miles Climate Heroes, where we meet incredible people making an impact to tackle climate change. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to the show. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday.